Mr. Anderson, welcome back. We've missed you. Wrestling, if nothing else, is a family business, although you don't have to be actual family for it to happen. Well, if you're going to talk about fake fans in wrestling, it's kind of hard not to talk about one of the first families of professional wrestling. And that's the subject of today's episode, because today, Dave knows all about the Anderson family. With kayfabe kin being everywhere, it seems that everyone probably has a favorite. However, there is one clan that is most certainly the stuff of legend. And of course, I'm talking about the Andersons. So let's take you back to the beginning. The year was 1966, and Gene Anderson, yes, an actual Anderson, teamed up with Larry Heinemey, better known as Lars Anderson. And together, the two of them formed the Minnesota Wrecking Crew. Now, eventually Lars would move on and decide that he'd rather live in Hawaii than in Minnesota. I could see that. But fear not, because the Minnesota Wrecking Crew would then get a new member. A member named Alan Rogowski, better known as Ole Anderson. Gene and Ole formed a new Minnesota Wrecking Crew, and as time went on, Gene decided he needed to start stepping back. But have no fear, because yet another Anderson was ready to take his place. And that Anderson might be the most popular one of the bunch. I'm talking about Martin Lundy, better known as Arn Anderson. Now, how exactly does Arn fit in the family? Well, that depends. He's been referred to as a brother, cousin, and nephew, so who really knows? I guess like Uncle Fester, it's just a matter of who's writing the show. Unless it's one of those weird family trees that actually doesn't fork. Now, these would be the original Andersons, and together they would win 11 tag team titles in total. But don't get me wrong, they're not done yet. Because the next fictional Anderson to join the fray is none other than Ric Flair. Okay, fine, he doesn't have the Anderson last name, but he was called a distant cousin, another Minnesotan cousin at that. And it's weird to me, because out of all the places known as Flair country, from Atlanta, Georgia, to Charlotte, North Carolina, and Minnesota, Ric Flair was actually born in Tennessee. Anyway, with Cousin Rick on board, the stage was set to form one of the greatest factions of all time, if not the greatest faction of all time, the Horsemen. Family friend Tully Blanchard would join Cousin Rick and brothers Ole and Arn to form the initial Four Horsemen faction. And throughout the 70s, 80s, and into the boom period, the Horsemen and the Anderson family were at their most powerful and prestigious. I guess that's where all the limousine riding and jet flying started for him. Now, eventually Ole would leave the faction, but that doesn't mean he was done with professional wrestling. In fact, behind the scenes, him and the now retired Gene Anderson would actually hold tryout camps to find a whole bunch of wrestlers and see who was worthy of claiming the Anderson name and continuing the family lineage. And allegedly Al Snow was a potential Anderson hopeful. But it wasn't until the mid-90s when we would see a new Anderson to the fray, and not only that, but it would be an Anderson for ECW. I'm talking about C.W. Anderson. Well, let's back things up a little bit. In the independent circuits, there were two men, Rocky and Pat Anderson, claiming to be part of the Anderson family. It was there that they discovered a wrestler by the name of Chris Wright, and they thought he had a somewhat familiar resemblance to the legendary Anderson family. So they decided to declare him an Anderson. Only problem was, he still needed a first name. Chris decided to go with his initials, C.W., and hence we got C.W. Anderson. And C.W. would go on to find success in the ECW. And Bryant Anderson, who would go on to wrestle in the independents for a while as well. But we still have two other names to consider. Now, one of these two names is better known by Mr. Kennedy. Kennedy! I forgot you have to say it twice. As we all know from his time in TNA, Ken Kennedy's real name is Ken Anderson. Now, when they signed him, WWE didn't want to confuse him with the rest of the Sons of Ander, so as the story goes, it was actually Paul Heyman who suggested that they call him by Vince McMahon's middle name, Kennedy, and the name stuck. And it has been said that if he wasn't released from the company, he was supposed to be the original third McMahon child, instead of Hornswoggle, eventually leading to a major push and a feud with Triple H. But even though he is an actual Anderson, no such claim to him being part of the legendary wrestling family has ever been made. Another actual Anderson to consider is Stone Cold Steve Austin. And no, I'm not getting my facts mixed up, but Anderson 316 says that Stone Cold's original birth name is Stephen James Anderson. Eventually, his stepfather would adopt him and he would take on the name Steve Williams. But wrestling promoters didn't want to confuse him with Dr. Death Steve Williams, so they changed him to Steve Austin. But I guess no one cared about confusing him with Lee Majors and the $6 Million Man. Wait a minute. There's a wrestler named Six, there's a wrestler named the $1 Million Man, and there's a wrestler named Steve Austin. But even though that is his last name, Stone Cold Steve Austin is definitely not an official Anderson. Which brings us to today. Now, by extension, Charlotte and the rest of Flair's children are technically Andersons, but nobody really seems to be bringing that up. But fear not, because there is an Anderson proper out there. I'm talking about Carl Anderson, former leader of the Bullet Club and currently on the WWE's main roster in a tag team with Luke Gallows. Carl the Machine Gun is the latest wrestler to represent the Anderson family. Carl's real name is Chad Allegra, and it wasn't until he started wrestling on the West Coast that he became Carl Anderson. And it was here that the NWA decided that this generation needed an Anderson of their very own. And Chad Allegra was repackaged as Carl the Machine Gun Anderson. And he even adopted the Spinebuster as his official finishing move to completely seal the deal. But as far as I'm concerned, wrestling always needs an Anderson. And there you have it, a brief overview of the Anderson family. But what do you think? What do you think are some hallmark traits of being an Anderson? And how important is the family to you? And who is your favorite Anderson? Let me know in the comments, and please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Thank you again for watching, and as always, this has been Dave Knows. Yeah, I know what you're thinking, but no, believe it or not, I'm not an Anderson. Yeah, go figure, right? I'm sure some of you really thought I was. Anyway, if you like this video, hey, check out some of the other videos I have. I have this one about Ric Flair and his world title record and the truth behind how many titles he actually has and how hard this is going to be for Cena to climb up to that number. Also, on top of that, I have another one right here, if you like old school wrestling, all about the 1970s Intercontinental title tournament that never was and what it should have been. So check these videos out, and thank you to all my supporters out there. Really means a lot. So check me out on patreon.com if you haven't yet, and also feel free to like, share, and subscribe. Thanks again for watching, and I have been Dave, and this has been Dave Knows.